What's up, guys? So today's story time. I'm going to talk a little bit about how I got into the tech industry as a programmer. When I was around 19 years old, I didn't have a college degree, as you know, but I made video games full-time for about 5 years before joining Google. So I'm going to tell a little bit about that story and how I got to that point. Let's go back to the early 2000s. So before actually we talk about what I was doing when I was in college, I'll talk a little bit about before that and the lead up to how we got there. I started coding at a young age, started with QBasic, if you're familiar with this. It's a basic language. But I quickly went on to C, and the reason for that is because that time I was really into what are called multi-user dungeons or MUDs, or basically online text-based RPGs. And a lot of those were coded, or the ones I knew were coded in C, and so I had to learn C, I had to learn about pointers, learn about all those things. And so that's where I got started. That's when I got really interested finally in making games and programming them. But obviously I was still in high school, and I wasn't making money programming or anything like that, but I knew I wanted to get into video games and code them. And so I actually ended up working at a comic shop near my house. The comic shop was called Crazy Eddie's. I remember convincing the owner, Eddie, that he should have a website. You know, I had no expertise in making websites, but I told him I did, or I told him I could figure it out. And so I built a website called ecrazyeddies.com, which was an Amazon-like, Amazon had been out for a little while, Amazon-like website for comics and Warhammer and D&D and those types of things. And that's when I really learned PHP, I learned MySQL, the basic LAMP stack back in probably 1999. Well, I worked at Crazy Eddie's for a couple years, and then I moved on to a company called Austrian Electric, where I was making websites for the towns and city and where I lived. They actually sourced that stuff out. And while I was doing that on the side, I found this company called CodeFire out in California. I used to go on gamedev.net and websites like that, and this is where I found out about CodeFire. What was interesting was that I don't remember exactly how it happened, but I remember talking to the guy, Ron Williams, I think was his name, and he was working at CodeFire, and he was responsible for the website. They were like selling merchandise and stuff like that. And so I said, hey, I can help out. And so I did that. I helped with the website a bit, and I mentioned to him that, hey, I also code games and I can code in C++ and stuff like that. He's like, oh, really? Because my brother's the CEO of CodeFire, and they were working on a game. Next thing I knew, I don't remember interviewing or anything, but I had a job offer, and it was for $40,000 a year. And so I took it. I quit school. This is probably in 2001, and I moved out west to Irvine, California, and started working at this company. We were building one of the first Xbox Live games. It was top-down shooter, 3D space type of thing. Very similar to a game called Continuum or Subspace, if you're familiar with that. We did that for about 8 months. I actually ended up becoming the lead programmer. I was 19, 20 years old. They promoted me to lead programmer. I don't know why exactly. There are about 4 or 5 programmers on the team. But that did not last long. The company actually went under, ran out of money. So I ended up going back home to Northwest Indiana, and I actually moved back only about my parents had moved a few streets away, and so I moved basically back where I started, and that sucked. So I ended up back in Indiana. But I had a taste of the job industry, and I knew I could do it. I was coding games already. I had 7-8 months experience. And so I started putting my resume out, and one of the companies was The Collective. The Collective had worked on a game called Buffy the Vampire Slayer for Xbox. It was a pretty good game, good combat system. They were working on Indiana Jones and then another unannounced game. And so they flew me out, and I interviewed with a few people, and one guy, Nathan, he would end up becoming a close friend of mine, but he was like the tech lead of the engineering team. He took a chance on me, and gave me a job, even though I had very limited experience. You know, went in as a mid-level engineer, and that was for like $55,000 a year. I took it. So packed my car up again, and I went out back, same place, Irvine, California. Ended up working in Newport Beach, and that was the start, the legit start of my career. I ended up at the Collective for about 5 years. Started as a mid-level programmer. I worked on the gameplay and graphics for a game called Wrath Unleashed. Then I went on to work on Star Wars Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith, the game. That was fun. I was a lead gameplay programmer for that. You know, that was a game where we had basically to build a game in 13 months, and so the quality wasn't high, but I was proud of that game, and I was proud of the combat of that game, and that was a lot of fun. And then I went on to be lead programmer of Da Vinci Code, another game we had to really squeeze into a small amount of time, but that was fun. And then I ended up being in the core technology group, where I was leading like our physics development, our tools and our libraries, and the core tech. After about 5 years of that, you know, I had a lot of fun in the video game industry. Shipped about 5 games there, but I ended up transitioning actually to Namco, where I worked on a game called Afro. I was contracted for a little bit. That took me up north to Santa Clara, California, and I was close to Google. So after about having 5 or 6 years of experience in the industry, I applied to Google for a second time, and they called me back and offered me an interview. And of course, you know, I studied a lot for that. I did not have a formal computer, so I had some computer science background, but of course I had to do some backfilling, and I had to learn along the way and learn the fundamentals. But yeah, I got the job at Google, and that was the start of my career as a programmer in the internet space, and out when I left games. And that was back in 2007, 2008. I mean, that's how I got started. You know, the fun thing about this is that breaking into the industry was a strange path. It wasn't like I went to college and then I went out and interviewed and then got a job in the game industry. You know, I went through by just helping out. I went online and I saw, this company called CodeFire. They needed a website, and I offered to help, and then that gave me an in, and then they hired me, and that was kind of the start of it. So it's not always a straight path. You kind of gotta. A lot of it's all relationships. A lot of it is relationships with people, and establishing those relationships is critical. So very lucky that those turn of events happened when I was young. I don't know what would have happened otherwise if I would have escaped to Northwest Indiana, but I'm glad it went down that way, and I had a blast in the video game industry. I certainly learned a lot, and I've been able to take a lot of things from that industry into the products that I build today. So that's a rough overview of how I got started. I don't know if you found it interesting, but that was my journey. I could talk more about details there. I'm happy to hear your feedback or comments. Leave a like, please, of course, that helps out, or subscribe. But let me know what you want to hear. Obviously, after Google, during Google, before that, the video game industry, happy to talk about any of that. So, thanks a lot.